A black-roofed cabin blooms with fire in the Blue Ridge night. A woman steps back into the laurel, face lit ember red. The scream that follows does not sound like a man, it sounds like a place being torn open. If you're watching now, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. And if this kind of deep dive storytelling pulls you in, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Lives bend around moments like this. One act can free a body and haunt a valley for generations. Sound crickets cut off mid-chorus. Smell pitch pine sap boiling in its own bark. Texture soot settling like soft rain on Dinah's forearms. They called the fold of land Fox Gap Hollow, a shadowed crease 2 miles off the old turnpike in the high country where the Blue Ridge breaks into ribs and ravines. On the night of October 5th, 1856, under a wind thin enough to whistle through nail holes, Dinah, the enslaved girl who slept on the hearthstones, rose without striking the trammel or the poker. She had learned to move in the cabin the way a stream moves through roots, finding the spaces, leaving no mark that lasts. The mountain farmer she served, Ephraim Kincaid, age 48 by the county tax rolls, snored the way he worked. Rough, steady, uncompromising. He had taken to sleeping with his boots by the bed and his belt coiled like a snake on the peg. On the table, a lard lamp. On the shelf, a ledger. On the lintel, a horseshoe nailed for luck. On Dinah's hands, the smell of ash and lye. She knew the cabin as a map of splinters, each board named by the pain it had once given her. What the hollow knew of Dinah was less. A shadow at the creek. A figure carrying water before sunup. A voice that never rose above a hum. Earlier that week, a peddler stopped at dusk, one of those men who stitched counties together with buttons and stories. He'd pointed at the hills and said, "A weather change is coming." Ephraim answered, "Weather changes, a man's place doesn't." He made Dinah hold the lantern while he counted coins. The peddler's parting look said more than his mouth. He had seen the cuff marks on Dinah's wrists and the welt under her jaw. He tightened his reins and rode on. Bystanders create history too. What would you do? 3 things happened that set this night apart. First, the creek fell to a trickle, bearing a flat of stones like vertebrae. The air turned brittle and sparks flew longer. Second, Ephraim drank from a squat green bottle and told a story about teaching obedience, the way some men tell dog hunting tales. Third, Dinah found the key to the smokehouse door under a shard of blue plate where Ephraim rarely looked sober. That key was no bigger than a wish, but it weighed as much as a decision. In the ledger neat block letters, despite a farmer's hand, there is a line for that day. October 5th, 1856, rendered 2 hogs. Mended fence north side. Braced sill. Whipped girl for sass. 3 words do most of the work in a sentence like that, and none of them are mended fence. Dinah waited for the breath pause between snores. In that soft gap, she slid the latch, stepped into the yard, and crossed to the woodpile. Sound owls arguing in the ridge oaks. Smell coal oil from the barn lantern she had palmed 3 nights earlier. Texture cornshuck rope rough against skin as she twisted a fuse. The lamp's flame licked the frayed end and turned it black and hungry. She laid the fuse under the eaves where pitch had seeped and hardened into amber teeth. She touched flame to teeth. The cabin inhaled. She told herself quietly, so the thought would not rattle the air, that a fire could be a key too. A lock you turn on a whole life. She remembered the time Ephraim struck her for dropping a kettle, the way the iron rang and her ears rang with it for a full hour. She remembered how he told a neighbor, laughing, "Fear's cheaper than feed." Dinah had learned to count time not by clocks, but by recoveries. How long before the welt sank? How long before the whisper of pain went quiet? Tonight, she counted something else. It took 8 breaths for the tinder to find the joist. It took 16 for the joist to speak to the rafters. It took no time at all for the scream to carve across the hollow. Fire keeps the score. A boy upridge, Lem Tothro, age 12, said later he saw the first glow at about 10:45 p.m. By the way, stars turn pale on that side. He woke his mother. She said, "Law, Lem, that man's prone to drinkin'. He'll sit up on bacon grease," and set himself alight. They watched from the porch, barefoot, counting heartbeats like old-time thunder. Bystanders again, turning fear into spectatorship, letting the fire make the choices they wouldn't. Who decides when someone else's emergency becomes yours? Inside, Ephraim thrashed. A bed frame scraped the puncheon floor. A boot thumped once. Dinah stood at the edge of the yard where the fence posts sagged like tired shoulders. She did not run. Not yet. She listened for the thing the old people said you could hear if you were quiet as a deer. The exact moment the roof learned, it was roof no longer. It came as a soft cough, followed by a rush, a clearing of the cabin's throat, then a column of sparks rising with a sound like grain poured from a high sack. The chimney held, then the chimney cracked. There is a scrap of paper in the county packet labeled Kincaid Estate Miscellany, File Note E. Wainwright, Deputy. Cabin burned in the night. Body unfit for removal until daybreak. Girl Dinah absent. Neighbor claims to have heard what he took for a bobcat. The deputy spelled bobcat with 2 B's and 2 T's. He spelled girl right. Dinah stepped backward into the laurel, where the leaves were stiff and glossy and the stems clawed at her skirt. Sound the tiny machine gun rattle of twigs when a rabbit bolts. Smell wet stone, now that the creek's sweet breath could carry uphill. Texture bark, wet enough to stick soot to her palms like a second skin. She knew there was a hunting path that stitched the hollow to the old Cherokee trace, and that once you found that older road, your boots fell into grooves worn by other feet and would carry you whether you meant it or not. She also knew Ephraim's brother kept 2 hounds lean enough to run all day. Downslope, the neighbors argued the math of distance. Ephraim's nearest line was a 1/4 mile across the draw, a 1/2 mile by foot, and a mile in a conscience. They held to their porches and watched. A woman said, "If that girl said it, the law will have her neck." A man said, "If she did, she had reason. He told me straight he'd trade her like a mule." Another voice, "Hush," in hollows. The word hush is a kind of prayer and a kind of rule. In Dinah's chest more than fear. There was a flat, cool space where fear had burned out. She had no papers, no kin in the ridge that she could name. What she had was a direction and the habit of surviving. She had the memory of another girl, sold down country 2 springs back, and the look that passed from hand to hand without touching. She had a small tin trinket she kept in the hem of her dress, a hammered disc the size of a thumbnail with a star punched through. She rubbed it once and felt the points like teeth. Re-engagement. What do you call justice when the only court is a fire you light yourself? At the creek crossing, the granite was cold as truth. She waded shin deep, wanting the water to lift the smoke from her skin, wanting her trail to read like rain. Up the far bank, the slope steepened and the night deepened, and the stars leaned close the way they do when you're high enough to forget the world has edges. Dinah paused by a chestnut stump, put her palm to the cut heartwood, and felt it still warm from the day's sun. She listened. Nothing but the tiny applause of settling ash behind her and the long wolf whistle of wind through a gap. She took one more breath and stepped into dark that felt like cloth, like the inside of an unstitched pocket where you might hide a life. Behind her, a beam fell. The ground shuddered. Somewhere upridge a dog started and then stopped as if it had changed its mind about the night. At first light, men would find the ledger unburned beneath a fallen stone and the key under the blue shard, and say it proved nothing one way or the other. They would tell each other the scream was not human, because believing otherwise would require a different kind of accounting. Dinah slipped between two rocks and disappeared into the rhododendron. Next, the hounds are loosed, and an old roomer steps out of the trees to follow them. The first bark cracked through the hollow like a rifle shot, sharp enough to shake the dew from spider webs. By the second bark, the valley knew. The chase was on. Justice or vengeance? What do you call it when the line between them blurs in smoke? Sound hooves striking the rocky grade. Smell singed timber wafting from the ruin below. Texture cold chain in the sheriff's fist. Leash rattling as the dog strained forward. Dawn in Fox Gap Hollow was never bright. The ridges blocked the sun until it was well past breakfast, leaving the valley in half-light where breath steamed and the earth sweated out last night's fire. At 6 o'clock that morning, Deputy Elias Wainwright tied his bandana tighter, spit into the ash, and declared, "She's no farther than 2 ridges." His words landed like nails. Beside him stood Ephraim's brother Jonah Kincaid, jaw set like a trap sprung but not yet closed. 2 hounds long-backed, ribs laddered under their hides, pulled against the leash, whimpering for release. In a ledger page, half scorched but legible, Wainwright later scrawled, October 6th, 1856 released hounds at first light. Weather dry, track plain. Girls' prints small, bare-toed in places. Took North Fork. Every mark in the ash was a confession. The drag of a hem, the hollow of a heel, the sudden scatter where she ran through laurel. Jonah bent low, touched a print with calloused fingers, then sniffed the blackened air. "She went to water," he muttered. "She'll think it hides her. But a dog's nose is older than any creek." The townsfolk gathered at a cautious distance, forming a crooked line of hats and shawls along the smoking ruin. Some whispered prayers, others muttered curses. One old woman tugged her shawl close and said, "Maybe she freed herself from worse than chains." A neighbor snapped back and left us with a killing. Silence fell again. Bystanders weigh more than they know. What would you do, join the hunt, or turn away? The hounds pulled harder. Wainwright nodded. Jonah loosed them, and the pair shot forward like arrows, noses down, tails stiff, voices rising in a ragged hymn of pursuit. Men followed, boots cracking twigs, muskets slung, curses thrown like stones into the brush. Behind them, women gathered scraps from the ash heap, hinges, pots, one scorched horseshoe, as if proof could make sense of what remained. Dinah was already 3 gullies ahead. She had cut through rhododendron, where stems knitted like wire, scraping her arms raw but buying minutes. She had crossed the creek twice, walking backward the second time to scatter her trail. She had paused by a chestnut snag, pressing her palm into old moss to steady her breathing. Still, she heard them. Dogs speak a language you don't mistake the climb of their baying, the distance shrinking by sound alone. Fear is a compass. It points backward as much as forward. She turned upslope. Rocks slipped underfoot. A crow startled from a branch and cawed like a herald, announcing her flight. Dinah kept moving, clutching the little tin disc at her hem. The star punched through it, cutting tiny crescents into her fingers. She whispered the names of people she once knew, but would never see again. Each name was a mile marker, each breath a bargain. By mid-morning, the chase spilled onto the ridge road. Witnesses later said they saw a thin figure dart across the turnpike, skirt snagged, hair loose, feet bare. One farmer hauling hay claimed he heard her sing under her breath. A tune not of sorrow, but of defiance. Sounded like she was steadying herself, he said, same way a man might whistle before he fires. His wagon blocked the hunter's view just long enough for her to slip into Laurel again. Whether he moved it slow on purpose, no one could prove. Bystanders again, choosing silence as cover. Would you risk yourself to tilt fate? The hounds yelped at the crossing, confused by hoofprints and hay, their song tangled. Jonah struck them with the flat of his hand until they found the scent again. Sweat dripped down his neck, mixing with ash dust. He muttered, "That girl's fire ain't done burnin' yet." At the same hour, the bell at Mount Pisgah Church tolled once for morning prayer. Its echo folded through the valleys. Folks later swore the bell didn't sound like metal at all, but like Ephraim's last scream stretched thin across ridges. Memory plays tricks, especially when guilt is the conductor. Dinah climbed higher. Her lungs felt scoured, throat raw from smoke still clinging to her. She reached a rocky shelf where lichens painted maps no one could read. She crouched low, listening. The dogs had paused. The hunters argued faintly, their words carried in fragments. North Ridge. Cut her off. She's near. Her heart hammered, not with panic, but with the certainty that choices narrowed like a funnel. She pressed her forehead to the stone, let it cool her, and whispered to herself, "Not chains, not fire, not dogs." 3 words marked the moment. Fire keeps the score. She rose, found a game trail, and slipped west. Beyond lay a stretch of woods where locals never lingered. Old tales spoke of lights bobbing at night, of whispers in the branches, of a place where compasses spun wrong. They called it Witch's Gap. Dinah had no reason to fear old tales. Her life had given her sharper ghosts. She entered the dark of Witch's Gap without looking back. Re-engagement. What happens when the hunted steps into a place the hunters fear more than the prey? The hounds balked at the tree line. Jonah cursed, tugged, but the dogs whined low, tails tucked, as if the very soil turned their courage sour. Wainwright spat into the dirt, eyes narrow. "Gap's got its own law," he muttered. "You chase her in there, you may not come out." Jonah tightened his grip, jaw like stone. The fire still glowed red in his memory, and the scream still rang. He took 1 step forward, dragging the dogs, their nails scrabbling against rock. Behind him, the hunters shifted uneasily, boots scuffing, glances darting. A place feared by the living, entered by the desperate. Dinah was in there now, and something else might be waiting too. Next, whispers rise in Witch's Gap, and not all of them belong to Dinah. The forest closed like a mouth behind her, swallowing light, sound, even the rhythm of her breath. Leaves hissed, though no wind moved them. Somewhere above, a crow cawed once, then fell silent. When survival pushes you into cursed ground, do you keep running or do you stop and listen? Sound drip of unseen water hitting stone. Smell iron tang laced with wet moss. Texture roots braided tight across the path, slick as rope. Locals had always whispered about Witch's Gap, a notch between 2 ridges where storms seemed to stall and shadows lingered long after sundown. Hunters said their dogs refused to track there. Children dared each other to step 3 paces past the marker stone, carved long ago with no name. On the morning of October 6, 1856, Dinah stepped deeper than any child had ever dared. Bare feet slid on loam. She pressed her fingers to a tree trunk slick with lichen, felt the pulse of water moving inside, as if the forest itself had veins. Behind her, the baying faltered. The dogs whimpered, circling, refusing to enter. Jonah Kincaid cursed, dragging them by their collars, until even his knuckles bled. Deputy Wainwright shook his head. "There's things don't belong to law in there," he muttered, "and I'd sooner not test which side we stand on." The posse hesitated, weight shifting from foot to foot, fear making cowards of their courage. Jonah spat black phlegm into the leaves. "Fire took my brother. Smoke took our name. You think I'll let a slip of a girl vanish because you fear shadows?" He stepped forward. The others hung back, bystanders again. What would you do? Follow him in, or let vengeance burn itself alone? Dinah moved with care, but not blind. She marked her way by small things, a notch in bark, a rock stacked on another habits of someone who knew the cost of being lost. At a stream that trickled out of stone, she knelt, cupped her hands, and drank. The water tasted of rust, old and sharp. She wiped her mouth, eyes scanning the trees. That's when she heard it. Not the dogs, not men. A voice, low, layered, like two speaking at once. Words she couldn't catch, stretched thin as cobweb. She froze, heart stuttering. The forest pressed in, air heavy with rot and pine pitch. Then silence. Only the drip of water again. She rose slowly, whispered to herself. Not chains, not fire, not dogs. The phrase steadied her legs. She pressed on. Jonah, forcing the hounds, found the same stream minutes later. He bent, splashed water on his face, and stared at the ground. Bare prints, toes splayed. She was close. The dogs whined, pulled back, tails between legs. Jonah slapped them hard, leaving red marks on pale fur. Track, he hissed. The animals trembled, but edged forward, ears flat. Wainwright lingered at the edge, muttering, Gap's got its own tally. Every step's a bargain. No one listened. Farther in, Dinah stumbled upon a cairn of stones. 7 high, black with age, moss tucked in the cracks. A carved mark at the top, a star with crooked arms. She touched it with the same hand that still held the tin disc from her hem. The punched star in metal, aligned with the carved star in stone. For a moment, something inside her eased, as if the place recognized her, or claimed her. Around her, the forest shifted tone. No birds, no insects, just the faint hum, like air inside a jug. Dinah crouched low, pressing herself into ferns. She listened. Jonah's boots snapped branches not far behind. His breath heavy, his curse words low. She knew he would not stop. She knew the dogs would find her sooner or later, even if they fought their own fear. That's when she saw it. A sliver of pale cloth snagged on a thorn, not hers. Old, frayed, half-rotted. She touched it smooth like cotton, but damp, smelling of mildew and something sweet-sour. A sleeve? A rag? Proof that others had passed here and never returned? She dropped it quickly, heart thudding. Fire keeps the score. As the sun climbed beyond the ridges, its light barely filtered through the dense canopy. Inside Witch's Gap, it looked like dusk, even at midday. Jonah shouted back to Wainwright, "She's ahead. I'll take her myself if you won't." Wainwright didn't answer. The posse stayed at the boundary, shifting uneasily, muttering prayers. None would step deeper. Dinah moved faster now, darting between trunks, breathing in short gasps. She pressed the tin disc to her lips, kissed the punch star, and shoved it back into her hem. She told herself each step was one farther from chains, one closer to freedom. Yet she also felt the gap watching, not like a hunter watches prey, but like a ledger balancing numbers. Re-engagement. What if the forest itself keeps accounts, just as men do, only harsher? By late afternoon, the hounds bayed again, closer, pushing her toward a ravine choked with laurel. Dinah scrambled down, slid on loose soil, grabbed roots to steady herself. She hit bottom hard, knees bruised. Above, Jonah appeared, silhouetted in the dim light, musket in hand, dogs straining. He shouted, voice echoing like iron struck on stone, "You can't run from blood!" Dinah pressed her back to the ravine wall, heart hammering. The dogs howled, teeth bared. Jonah aimed, eyes cold. The forest around them went utterly still. Not even breath moved the leaves. Dinah whispered once more, "Not chains, not fire, not dogs." Next, the forest answers that whisper, and Jonah finds out the gap keeps its own laws. A musket leveled, 2 hounds snarling, and a girl cornered against stone. Then the forest itself seemed to inhale. Survival depends not only on courage, but on whether the land decides to shelter you or to bury you. Sound a crack like timber splitting, though no tree fell. Smell sulfur rising faint from Jonah's flint as he primed the shot. Texture damp rock pressing Dinah's spine, cold and slick as sweat. Jonah Kincaid steadied the musket. His jaw locked, his breath measured. The hounds barked and snapped, their nails clawing dirt from the ravine wall. Dinah clutched the hem of her skirt, feeling the tiny star-punched disc bite into her fingers. She whispered again, "Not chains, not fire, not dogs." Jonah pulled the trigger. The hammer struck, click. No fire, no smoke, just silence. Jonah cursed, primed again, sparks spitting. Still, nothing. The forest's air was too damp, too heavy. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. Dinah's eyes widened, not with fear now, but with a strange recognition. The gap had chosen to intervene. The dogs yelped suddenly, jerking back as if struck. Their eyes gleamed pale in the dim, their ears flat. They whined, tails low, then turned and bolted up the slope, abandoning their master. Jonah swore, tried to chase them, but his boot slipped on loose soil. He slid halfway down the ravine wall, musket scraping rock, knuckles torn. Above, a crow wheeled once, cawed 3 harsh notes, then vanished into the canopy. Jonah froze, as if even he recognized omen when he heard it. Dinah moved. She scrambled along the ravine bottom, breath short, knees stinging from stone. Jonah regained his footing, fury twisting his face. He hurled the musket aside, leapt down after her, and grabbed at her arm. His fingers closed on fabric, yanking hard. Dinah tore free, leaving a strip of sleeve in his fist. He stared at it, panting, and shouted into the trees, "You can hide her, Gap, but she's Kincaid debt. Blood for blood." Echo answered. Not her voice, not his. A low murmur, layered like voices overlapping. The same sound Dinah had heard at the cairn. Jonah spun, eyes wild. "Who's there?" Only silence answered, followed by a single drop of water landing on his cheek, though the canopy above was dry. He wiped it, found his fingers smeared red. Sap, he told himself. Sap, thick as blood. Dinah ran. She found a narrow cut in the rock, barely wide enough for her shoulders. She slipped inside, scraping skin, squeezing, until darkness wrapped her like cloth. Jonah lunged too late, his hand slamming stone, knuckles bleeding fresh. He shouted her name, though he had never used it before without a curse. "Dinah!" His voice echoed hollow, swallowed by the gap. Inside the crevice, Dinah pressed flat, heart racing. The air smelled of damp earth and iron. She could hear Jonah pacing outside, muttering, spitting, swearing. At one point, his voice cracked, not with rage, but something raw. "You think fire makes you free? You think screams don't echo?" His words trailed, half swallowed by the trees. A memory flickered for Dinah. Ephraim once boasting, "A scream's just wasted breath. Hollow eats it quick." He had been right, only now the hollow seemed to return it. Dinah closed her eyes, forcing her breath slow. She had outrun men, dogs, musket, but how do you outrun a place that wants you? As dusk thickened, Jonah gave up the chase. He climbed out of the ravine, torn and limping. At the ridge edge, Wainwright appeared, face pale. "Dogs came back without you," he said. Jonah snarled. Gap took her side. But blood don't stay hidden. His words sounded less like promise, more like threat hurled at the dark. Wainwright crossed himself. Neither man spoke again until they left the tree line. Dinah waited long after their footsteps faded. The crevice held her like a coffin. Only when the whippoorwills began their night calls did she crawl out, trembling, scraped raw. She found herself beside the cairn again, the 7 stones stacked, the crooked star carved deep. She touched it with her bleeding hand. For a moment, she thought she heard a hum, faint as breath, through reeds. She whispered, "Thank you," not sure if she meant the gap or the memory of those who had passed before. Fire keeps the score. Re-engagement. What would you do if the land itself seemed to claim you as kin? Dinah pushed west again, through tangled laurel and dark pines. The night deepened, stars muffled by cloud. She stumbled once, nearly fell, then caught herself on a snag. Her hand burned, blood mixing with bark. She thought of the village behind her, of the porch voices debating whether to join the chase, of the fire's glow reflected in neighbors' eyes. She thought of silence louder than screams. By midnight, she reached a ridge break. The valley below showed a faint scatter of lanterns from another settlement, distant, unfamiliar. She crouched, chest heaving, realizing she was outside the reach of the Kincaid farm at last. But freedom was not yet hers. Stories cling, guilt follows, and Witch's Gap does not easily release what it claims. Next, whispers spread through the Blue Ridge of a girl vanished into cursed woods, and a hollow that began to eat more than screams. Lanterns flickered in the valley, but no one dared climb to the ridge where the fire's glow had died. Whispers carried faster than smoke, and soon every cabin in Blue Ridge country told the tale of a girl who burned her master and fled into cursed ground. When stories become survival, the truth bends, yet fear sharpens every edge. Sound frogs, croaking loud in swampy bottoms. Smell smoke, lingering in wool coats days after the fire. Texture pine needles slick with dew under boot soles. By October 8, 1856, Fox Gap Hollow had changed. Children were kept indoors, doors barred earlier, lanterns left burning through the night. Ephraim Kincaid's body was buried quick, the preacher mumbling short verses as if longer prayers might anger the air. No one carved a headstone, just a wooden cross, plain, set shallow. Some said the ground refused to hold him each morning. The soil sagged, as though trying to spit the man back up. Jonah prowled the settlement, like a man scalded from the inside. His dogs would not enter the yard anymore. They whined at the cabin ruins, tails low, and pulled to be away. Jonah cursed, dragged them, then gave up, staring at the blackened timbers as if they'd mocked him. "She's out there," he muttered, voice rough, "and the hollow feeds her." At the general store, men argued in low voices. One said, "If she lived, she'll freeze by first snow." Another countered, "If the gap keeps her, she'll live longer than any of us." A third spat tobacco juice into the dust. A slave don't outlive the law. Yet none volunteered to track her. Not anymore. Bystanders again content to let a story carry what they themselves wouldn't dare. What would you do, hunt her, or pray distance made her a ghost? Primary source, preserved in a diary at Mount Pisgah Church, entry dated October 10th, 1856. The air in service carried smoke. Women fainted. Children wept. All whispered the same. Her name not to be spoken. Yet I wrote it. Dinah. For if her fire be curse, still better cursed by truth than by silence. As the valley struggled with fear, the land itself shifted. Hunters returned from ridge trails reporting no game. Snares hung empty. Even birds seemed fewer. Hollows eating more than men, one said. It's eating meat itself. The claim spread. And with it, the idea that the valley was being punished not just for Ephraim's cruelty, but for every neighbor who had looked away. Dinah, meanwhile, moved west. She kept to ridges, following deer tracks, sleeping under rhododendron thickets where roots arched like cages. She stole apples from a mountain orchard, drank creek water, wrapped her feet in bark strips when skin tore. Nights were worst, each one filled with the echo of Ephraim's scream replaying in wind shifts. Sometimes she thought she heard new voices layered on top, names she didn't know, whispers pressed against her ear, though no one was near. Witch's Gap had not let her leave empty. It had given her company. One night, as frost silvered the leaves, she came upon an abandoned cabin slumped against a slope. Roof caved, chimney cracked, door hanging. She stepped inside cautiously. The floor smelled of mold, old soot, and something sweeter, like sugar burned too long. In the corner lay a child's shoe, tiny, rotted, leather curled in on itself. She touched it, heart aching, then set it back. She whispered, "Not me." The forest did not answer, but the air thickened as though it remembered. By mid-October, Blue Ridge travelers swore the hollow groaned at night. Mule drivers camped far from its mouth. A man passing on the turnpike claimed he saw a glow through the trees. Not lantern, not moon, but fire climbing upward in silent columns. He fled, leaving his wagon half-loaded. Rumors multiplied. The hollow was hungry. Ephraim's screams were only the first course. Re-engagement. What happens when a place begins to swallow not just one man's sin, but everyone's silence? At Mount Pisgah, the preacher warned, every valley has its Judas tree, every hollow its gallows. Mark me, Fox Gap is marked. Yet he himself avoided saying Dinah's name. Mothers hushed their children if they whispered it. Fathers clenched jaws. The story bent her into something more than human. Sometimes a witch, sometimes a saint, always a warning. Meanwhile, Jonah would not stop searching. On the night of October 19th, lantern swinging, he entered Witch's Gap alone. Villagers heard his dogs bay once, then fall silent. Hours later, he stumbled back, face pale, beard full of cobwebs. He said nothing. When pressed, he whispered, "I saw eyes, not hers, not man's, watching." He never entered again. Dinah pressed farther west, leaving the hollow behind, but the legend did not release her. The land carried her name now, even when mouths refused to. Fire keeps the score. Next, winter presses down, and the hollow begins to claim more than just livestock. The first frost cracked across the valley like glass breaking underfoot. By December, snow sealed Fox Gap Hollow in silence deeper than any sermon. Cold changes stories. It makes hunger sharper, guilt heavier, and fear harder to ignore. Sound branches groaning under ice. Smell wood smoke leaking from chinks in half-starved cabins. Texture snow crust, sharp enough to cut bare ankles. 1856 bled into winter, with the settlement staggering. Ephraim's fields, once worked by forced hands, lay black and barren. Corn stalks rattled empty in the wind. Chickens froze on their roosts. The few hogs left grew lean. "Hollow cursed us," muttered Old Man Dillard, shaking his head by the church stove. "Girl's fire lit more than pine, it lit God's anger." Esgrade. The preacher tried to ban talk of Dinah's name, but every silence grew heavier. Neighbors saw shadows in the trees that moved against the wind. Hunters brought back nothing but frostbitten fingers. A boy sent to fetch water vanished, his tracks ending at the hollow's edge. His mother wailed, tearing at her hair. But the men only muttered. Gap took him. Bystanders again accepting the story as shield rather than risking search. What would you do if your own child vanished into a place where no man dared follow? Jonah Kincaid turned gaunt. He drank from Ephraim's old bottle, sitting nightly by the ruins of the burned cabin. Sometimes he spoke to the blackened stones, as if his brother still sat there. "She's out there, Dinah, you and the hollow, feeding each other. But winter'll break you. Fire don't warm forever. He would pass out in the ashes, dogs curled at his side, and neighbors would drag him home at dawn. Meanwhile, Dinah moved carefully through ridges farther west. She found caves where smoke seeped upward through cracks, proof that Cherokee had once wintered there. She lined her shelter with pine boughs, wrapped her feet in deer hide stolen from a trap line, drank melted snow from cupped hands. Nights were long, and dreams longer dreams, where Ephraim's scream braided with the cry of the boy who vanished, where whispers in the trees pressed her name against her ear. She would wake cold, whispering her litany. Not chains, not fire, not dogs. It steadied her, but it did not silence the hollow. By January, stories grew wilder. Travelers claimed to see lantern lights bobbing through the gap when no man dared enter. A midwife swore she heard knocking on her cabin wall at midnight. 3 slow raps, then silence. In the morning, she found child-sized footprints in the snow, leading nowhere. Fear turned every creek into proof. Primary source: from a letter dated February 3, 1857, by schoolteacher Martha Creel. Children whisper of her in class. They say Dinah walks the ridges at night with fire cupped in her hands. Some call her witch, some call her angel. I do not know which, but I know this. When I hear the wind through the hollow, it sounds like hymns sung off-key. Food dwindled. Men argued over snares. Women hoarded beans. The hollow's hunger felt contagious. It eats what we hide, one farmer muttered. It eats what we deny. By then, silence itself was a kind of offering, re-engagement. Can a community survive when its own fear becomes part of the curse? In early February, Jonah disappeared. His dogs returned alone, muzzles iced, eyes wild. They refused food, howling each night at the same hour Ephraim had burned. Neighbors guessed Jonah had entered the gap one last time, drunk and desperate. No one went to look. Gap keeps what it wants, they said. Dinah, hidden miles away, learned to set rabbit snares, to fish through ice with sharpened sticks. She sang quietly to herself, hymns half remembered from overheard sermons, each note a shield. Yet, she too felt the curse at her back. Every path seemed watched. Every fire she lit whispered with voices not her own. Freedom was hers, yes, but freedom with shadows chained to it. Fire keeps the score. By thaw, the settlement was broken. Livestock lost, men gone, women whispering. Mount Pisgah preacher said, "The hollow's ledger ain't done." And in that season of hunger, another child vanished at dusk, this time leaving only a mitten pressed into snow. Next, spring thaws the valley, and the hollow begins to speak, not through vanishings, but through echoes the living cannot explain. Snow melted into black mud, and with it came the thaw of memory. The land no longer just swallowed bodies, it began to return sounds no mouth had made. When echoes rise where silence should be, the living question not only what they hear, but what they owe. Sound drip of thaw water from eaves, falling in steady beats. Smell rot of leaves crushed under wet boots. Texture fog clinging to coats, heavy and damp as wool left too long in a cellar. By March of 1857, Fox Gap Hollow was not just feared, it was avoided like plague ground. Men cut new trails around it, adding miles to their journeys. Women carried laundry to creeks farther away, even if it meant breaking ice. Yet the hollow refused to be forgotten. Each evening, as the sun slid behind Blue Ridge peaks, voices rose faint through the timber. Some swore it was Ephraim screaming still. Others claimed they heard Jonah cursing his brother's name. A few whispered they heard Dinah's voice, not in terror, but in song steady, low, carrying like a hymn through fog. At the store one April morning, a peddler asked, "What woman sings so fine at night?" Heard her plain as any choir. The men shifted uneasily, eyes down. "Ain't no woman singing," the shopkeeper muttered. The peddler laughed, but the room stayed cold. That is how stories live, by what no one dares admit aloud. Dinah, far west of the hollow now, made her way into Tennessee ridges. She worked odd days at farmsteads, where no one asked questions if the work was strong and the pay small. She kept her head down, moved on often, never leaving a name. Yet the gap's echoes trailed her. More than once, a farmer's child would say, "Mister, that woman hums at night same as the trees do when we pass Fox Gap." Dinah would pack her bundle before dawn and vanish again. Freedom, yes, but shadowed freedom. Back east, spring revealed more than voices. Meltwater uncovered bones along the creek below the hollow. Small, white, brittle as chalk. A trapper found a skull lodged between roots, teeth grinning as if the forest itself had bitten it free. The sheriff refused to collect them. "Ground's too soft," he muttered. Best let it keep what it unearthed. Neighbors whispered that the bones were Ephraim's, though his grave lay marked with the plain wooden cross. Others said they were older proof that the hollow had long kept tally. Primary source, Journal of Schoolteacher Martha Creel, dated April 27, 1857, "Children now play a cruel game. They whisper each other's names into a hollow log, then wait to hear which name the wind repeats back. They call it Dinah's Roll." Twice now, the wind has repeated names of children later found wandering in the night, eyes blank, mouths humming. I am afraid. Neighbors began to believe that every silence they kept fed the hollow. One man, racked with guilt, confessed to the preacher that he had once seen Ephraim strike Dinah, but had turned away. "I thought it weren't my affair," he said. "Now each night I hear him holler, and I see her shadow pass my window." The preacher gave no penance. He only stared at the floor, murmuring, "Some debts ain't for men to settle." Re-engagement. What would you do if the very air repeated the secrets you buried? By summer, crops failed again. Rain came too hard or not at all. The ground soured. Families left, wagons creaking along the turnpike, children staring back at the ridges. Those who stayed lived half in fear, half in denial. Some swore they saw Dinah's figure crossing fields at dusk, skirts brushing wheat. Others insisted it was nothing more than fog and guilt. Fire keeps the score, and so the hollow's legend grew no longer just about a girl or a cabin, but about a place that took silence as offering and gave back echoes sharp enough to cut. Next, years later, travelers find the hollow abandoned, yet they swear the fire never stopped burning. Decades passed, but Fox Gap Hollow did not heal. Grass grew high where cabins once stood, yet travelers swore the smoke never truly cleared. When memory lingers longer than men, a place itself becomes the witness. Sound, wind, moaning through hollow logs, like breath drawn through teeth. Smell burned pine still sharp after 30 years. Texture soot that stains fingers black, though no fire burns. By the 1880s, maps began to drop the settlement's name. Old trails vanished under Laurel, and the turnpike shifted west. Locals spoke of the hollow only in whispers, if at all. Yet stage drivers told passengers to hush when passing the ridge, for fear of stirring voices in the fog. One diary from a traveler in 1883 records, "At dusk, we crossed the ridge called Fox Gap. Driver warned us not to look to the trees. Still, I saw its smoke rising from no chimney, and a woman's song faint as a lullaby. My companion insisted he saw a figure with fire in her hands. We prayed until the trees thinned." Ephraim's grave marker rotted, fell, and vanished under weeds. Jonah was never found. Some swore his dogs howled at the same hour every autumn night, long after their own deaths. The church at Mount Pisgah lost congregants, then its roof, then its walls. Only the bell remained, cracked, hanging crooked, said to toll without wind on nights the hollow groaned loudest. And Dinah? Her name dissolved into legend. Some believed she slipped west, joined communities where freedom's papers meant safety, raised children who never knew chains. Others believed the gap itself kept her, that she became part of the echoes, her song woven with the trees. A few whispered she still walked ridges, never aging, fire cupped in her palms. Bystanders who once turned away were remembered in silence, too heavy to shake. The hollow's lesson became clear to later generations. Neglect is complicity, and silence feeds curses more than screams ever could. What would you do, faced with a horror everyone else pretends not to see? Fire keeps the score, re-engagement. And if the score never ends, who balances the ledger? By the early 20th century, hunters avoided the entire slope. Surveyors claimed their compasses spun near the cairn. School children dared each other to carry stones from the creek, only to wake at night hearing Ephraim scream under their windows. The hollow outlived them all, turning one girl's desperate fire into a valley's eternal shadow. Next, some said, the land would claim strangers too. Cliffhanger. On fog-heavy nights, travelers swore they saw two glows, one red as ember, one pale as bone, moving side by side through the trees. No hoofprints followed, no lantern smoke drifted. Just lights, silent, steady, keeping pace until the road bent away. And to this day they whisper, if you stand at the old boundary stone where the crooked star is carved, the forest hums your name back to you. Not in your own voice, but in hers. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.